this evening's program is among the unique kind, because it will contain a lot of experiential, private information of my own and of my own life, much of which has really never been made public in any shape or form. Now, some of it, a small amount of it, has been made public quite a few decades ago at the Philosophical Research Society, and the gentleman who, among other things, donated this chair to me, my late friend Dr. James Ingebretson, said to me afterwards, "You shouldn't disclose that much about yourself. If you do, you are going to get sick." And sure enough, I went home and I had the lousiest influenza that I ever had in years. So I hope the same will not occur now, because after all, the initial sacrilege has been committed already. In any event, let me see. I gave the title to this talk with the ambiguous notion that we will be talking generally about beauty, which we actually will do, and into that to weave some personal experiences of mine, which were extremely important in determining what much of the subsequent course of my life. I lived, as you may have heard me babble about it before, I lived in northern Hungary, which had by then, by the evil graces of the victorious powers of World War I, been changed into Slovakia, a very inferior little country, which, however, is doing much better now. But that is where we lived. My family came there in the mid-19th century and has been there until comparatively recent times. And it was a magical place, which I'm sure was in part responsible for some of the experiences that occurred there and maybe even thereafter. As I say, my family lived there, and one of our ancestors from whom we received that estate and that house lived there. They lived there even longer. And the house was built in the Turkish days, which is up till the very early 19th century, when the United European powers managed to kick the Turks out of Hungary, which was quite an accomplishment itself. Well, one thing I can say in view of the title for this evening, that it was a life in a very beautiful, what would pass for a beautiful atmosphere. We had a great big garden with beautiful plants in it, and lovely little animals, including snakes, which, however, unlike in California, were not poisonous, and innumerable thunderstorms in the summertime, which caused maybe one of the early phenomena that I'm about to report, in the fact that regularly, almost every afternoon in the summertime, there would be unusual things happening, often within the context of a thunderstorm. Well, we had a big thunderstorm and big, tall, ancient trees around. So when the thunderstorm was over, my father came in the house and said, "Come on, I want to show you something." So we went down a period into the garden, and there was one of the very ancient trees, and on the bark of the tree coming down from above, there was an ongoing line of dark letters, which were actually in our alphabet, which means my father had read already, and it was the Latin sentence Immaculata, the Immaculate One. My father said, "Well, the Blessed Virgin has honored us." And so that was just one of the minor things. In that same area, whenever I went out by myself, without the prying eye of the adults, then all kinds of interesting things would happen. For one thing, there was one sort of semi-nebulous entity who came up to me and was very friendly, and whenever I walked that path, it was really the path that led to the end of the property where our family chapel was also, and I would go over there, and he would come up, introduce himself, and he was obviously not a flesh and blood human being. And so I asked him too, I said, "Well, friend, what are you, or who are you?" Because whenever I went down there, he would appear. And he looked at me, he said, and I was probably no more than 4 years old or 5. He said, "Well," he says, "I think to you I can tell what I am. I am a dragon." I said to myself, if I had been familiar with that language, I would have said to myself, "Oy vey." But the dragon was very friendly, very nice, and told me very exciting stories over and over again, and so on. So I was always very pleased to meet him. And there were little creatures which the Theosophists and other strange folk, if you know any of them, right? If the Theosophists and such strange folk would call nature spirits, little funny-looking creatures that even have the power to change their own appearance from time to time, and that were particularly ensconced in one section of the garden. But they were very happy little folk, and they certainly were not a matter for concern. Now, as time went on, and I increased in age and stature, there it's better for me if I don't make any notes, because my notes are up in the sky in any event. In any event, So in this beautiful great garden, where I first encountered, among others, not that's of any great interest to anybody, the legendary ginkgo tree. We had quite a few of them. We have a great big one in the courtyard of my present apartment house. It's a Chinese tree which was discovered only in the 19th century and then brought into various other countries in Europe and in America. It has a sort of heart-shaped leaves, and it grows very big and very old. And so, particularly in the autumn when the leaves fall, it was a lot of fun to be under the ginkgo tree. In any event, there were creatures visible and invisible that I conversed with. And since my parents were very broad-minded that way, I would tell them. And I told my father, particularly, who had the most matter-of-fact attitude towards spiritual things of anyone I ever encountered, in or outside of theosophy and so forth. We said, oh yes, those things exist. And similarly about the spirits of the dead, which is always never go overboard responding to spirits, because they will ask too much of you. So just be nice to them, tell them we'll pray for them and leave them alone. Well, there was quite a bit, because from the Napoleonic era onwards, all of my ancestors on my father's line were buried in the crypt on that property underneath the chapel. So then, when I was, according to my mother's testimony, was a very truthful woman, but I almost didn't believe here this one. At the age of 3, I had a very unusual experience, which in Jungian circles would be classified as a big dream, which I always felt was a rather unfortunate expression. I mean, a big dream, big deal, you know. But anyway, that's what they call it. So this was at a regular night, and the only way I ever came up with the figure that I was 3 years old was because my mother told me. And the last time she told me was probably a few days before her death here in Los Angeles. So she really insisted on that. And so apparently at the age of 3, a little tyke had this curious dream. I dreamt that I walked into a big sort of Victorian living room, which was somewhat like our living room that we had, you know, which had big windows. The windows were covered by sort of heavy Victorian drapery, curtains that were hanging down, and somebody had come into my bedroom and got me by the hand and was leading me out into that living room. So we went into the living room and he led me up to some of these big heavy curtains that hung there. As to the attire or the looks of this person who was leading me, I can't really say very much. But it was a man of dignified dress and nature who was quite forthcoming and friendly. No name was mentioned. So he came and drew the heavy drapes aside. So you could look outside because there were great big, what they call here, French windows. Curiously enough, I haven't seen any of them in France, but I have seen them in Hungary. So he drew the curtains aside and showed me a sort of tableau vivant, which means a living picture. Which when you have a picture made to look like a painting or something of that sort, but with living actors or persons participating in it. So he led me there and made me look out the windows. These are big, big windows. So I looked out the window and I saw a curious scene. One that, even though I had it at the age of 3, according to my mother, who was a pretty truthful woman, it never left me in terms of its memory, and apparently for a good reason. The scene that I observed through that window was a not very friendly one. It showed an ocean or a lake, some kind of a body of water, which was stirred up by winds, and overhead apparently a thunderstorm, which of course we were quite familiar with lightnings coming down and striking the water, and in the water stood a gigantic figure. Not very pleasant to talk about, but I talked about it a few times since then. This figure was standing in the water up to about mid-calf, standing in the water. He had a fierce expression on his face and a beard, which people didn't have much like they do nowadays. And in his hands he held, believe it or not, a round globe, such as we had in the house, because everybody had a globe that was the map to see all the world. He held this globe in his hand, and his fingernails, or perhaps more accurately described as claws, were embedded in the globe. So he held the globe of the world in his 2 hands, with his claws being embedded in the globe itself, and from the globe there were falling drops. I couldn't quite tell what they were. Were they water? Were they tears? Were they blood? I was of the opinion that they were blood. And I was quite familiar with blood because we had all kinds of animals and things of that sort. So there he stood with a rather triumphantly malign expression on his face, holding this curious object, out of which the drops were freely flowing into the water. So I stood there and said, all right, this old guy is showing me this, well, I might as well look. And that's what I did. I looked. I didn't ask any questions. But there was no dialogue taking place during this dream. This was a genuine dream at all. But I came up there to that window and looked out and saw all of this. And so there I stood for, to my mind, a considerable time, after which time the person who led me there who appeared to be related to or the same person with the one who was holding the globe outside, came and drew the curtains, and the scene was over. And then, by some kind of guidance, I was led out of this big living room, which was somewhat like ours, and back to my bedroom, and I went to sleep. Now, this was on a Saturday night, I even remember that much, and so about once or twice a month we had the Holy Eucharist at our family chapel at the end of the garden. So we had that morning, Monday morning, because it probably stayed overnight, the priest who was our chaplain at that time, although he did not live there, had with us a breakfast. Maybe it was Sunday morning. In any event, my father said to me, "Now come on, Stephan, and you got to tell the story of your dream," which I already told my father. My father was my dream master. And so I got up on my little chair and at the table, and I told pretty much of what I told you. And the priest was shaking his head, not as much in disbelief or disapproval, but in amazement. And then when my story was over and people were asking questions, so then finally I was asked maybe one or two more questions about it, and then the priest said that the Holy Spirit sometimes speaks to little children, and apparently, according to my mother's account, I was only 3 years old. Speaks to little children, and what he says to little children is worth paying attention to. So listen to this and keep it in your mind. And then we went on with our breakfast and all of that. The priest went home. But let us say this, even though I was a big dreamer, I had never had a dream this impressive to me before, or probably even after. So it was a very disturbing, sort of stirring up dream. And then I spoke about it further to my father, to my mother, and they all assured me that I would probably find out more about its meaning as time went on. There was no reason to be disturbed by it or anything of that sort, because there are all kinds of good sources of information in the dream world, and they will come to us, especially if we are welcoming to them, and then we may know something more than before. So that quieted me down, but curiously and happily, in some ways, it never left me alone. That dream was with me to the present day, and there was a reason for it. Because as time went on, and I kept remembering that dream, and that rather human but demonic-looking individual who was holding the globe, the world, in his hand, I was disturbed by it. I talked to my father about it. I probably talked to Priester and to us. Nobody said, "Well, keep thinking about it, don't forget it, and eventually you will find what will really be an important meaning." And so it was, as time went on, not very long time. We may have been about 5 years old by then. I came across some written material in an encyclopedia type book. After all, we lived out in the country. We had no electricity, but we had kerosene lamps and candles and things of that sort. But and a huge, overwhelmingly large library, of course. It was the age before television, the age before any of those things. But let's say people did get information. And so what I found in an encyclopedia that my father had, he had a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, he had a few others, and what we found was that this image of an unsavory, huge, maybe semi-gigantic being holding the world in his claws, and with a malign grin on his face, for that matter, that this was an image that may have been very easily derived from, what do you think, Gnosticism. So here I was, probably by then I was maybe 4 years old, and I was given a Gnostic dream of the demiurge holding the world. And I said, well, if that's what it is, but now I had a new task, which lasted practically throughout my life, namely to find out what incarnation Gnosticism is. And I worked at it very diligently. So wherever we went, where there were a lot of books, especially historical books, encyclopedic books and so forth, there I was, a little fellow, marching up to the bookcase, grabbing the volume with the G's and being engrossed in the account of Gnosticism. Year after year, until finally the day came when I was sort of, well, as you will see, my repertoire in this field had been enriched, and so I wasn't so wildly eager to get more information, but I felt that it would come to me anyway. And it did. Now, the rest of the story, as the late newscaster Paul Harvey, who maybe some of you still remember, Paul Harvey would say, and this is the rest of the story. But the rest of the story was that I looked so assiduously, and so obviously if you are that eager to find information on something, you're going to find it. And the things that I found was very, very interesting to me. And at least one time it was, of course, these things now these were all done. Hello, come on in. If you want, that is. Okay. Come on in and have a seat. Good. So, let's say, again, don't imagine that this was some kind of an obsessional activity on my part. Because I would come into, our entertainment was to go and visit neighbors. Then, what's that? In any event, this particular activity consisted in the fact that you brought your idea, your image, your dream, whatever you read out to some of the people, and you were wondering what they would tell you about it and how they would interpret it. And our priest who was there when I told it said, "Well, son, you are still little, but you belong in the seminary," which in itself was a dire forecasting of the future, shall we say. But it did come to pass, although, as you see, I didn't stay there. In any event, we kept bringing it up from time to time, and then once when I was out in the garden under one of the big ginkgo trees, I heard a sort of a voice, an inner voice. It wasn't something that you would have been able to record even at that time. And this inner voice said, you have something to do with that subject. You have to keep looking for it, because it is your task in this life to address yourself to that. Don't worry, don't be afraid. This is nothing evil, this is nothing disturbing. It is perfectly natural, but you are perfectly natural to discover things in this. I said, okay. So, sure enough, as time went on, here and there again, I would get small flashes of direction, shall we say. And these were largely to the effect that, look, little boy, this is a lost part, a lost portion of Christianity. See, that needs to be rediscovered. And you had that dream because you are asked to play a role in that discovery. Are you willing to do that? I said yes. And I said yes many more times over the years, because that same voiceless voice kept coming and said, now go here, now go there, now pick up this book, now go to that university, now go to the Vatican Museum, always in search of this strange thing that came to me in that dream. So obviously, as a Gnostic priest and a Gnostic teacher, when I'm telling you this is obviously an experience of considerable significance to me, which if I had not told it, I would have felt deprived myself, and I would have deprived you. So I didn't want to do that. So obviously my calling in that direction, whatever you wish to call it, call a calling, was of an early and powerful beginning that also wouldn't let me go. Just like there was that love song, "Oh love that would not let me go," that way. It wouldn't let me go. It was always there in the back. We went to visit some neighbors, which were usually at least a good half an hour, 45 minutes, hour by horse carriage to go to. And all the neighbors had extensive libraries. All of them had history books and encyclopedias and so forth. And there I went, boom, to the G. And I always found something that was not readily available elsewhere. Then time went on, obviously. We were still in the same location, It was, I was about 7 when I left my ancestral home. And then, of course, the home left me because the Soviets came and destroyed everything. In any event, that's just garnishing to the main dish. But the issue was that by then I was convinced that the more I looked and the more I imagined on the imaginary plane, the more I would discover about this curious calling, which I was very interested in. I wasn't obsessed. I did all the other things that other children did. I liked to go visiting, especially one neighbor of ours who were very close friends to my father. They had the most astonishing and sweet bakeries of almost any time or place that I had partaken of such things. They had a wonderful Hungarian chestnut puree with slag. There's nobody around who speaks German anymore. I'm going to throw a tantrum, a German tantrum. That's really in any event. It's a very good stuff. I even got sick as several dogs with it once, but that didn't bother me at all. In any event, that was only one evening, which however impressed me very greatly, and the impetus of which I obviously followed in certain ways all my life. But there were other things to come. And among them was that I then encountered one particular book. And I think I have an imperfect reprint of it somewhere. It is a book by 19th century Russian writer Nikolai Merezhkovsky. And Merezhkovsky was very interested in religion. In any event, that didn't do any harm. So he wrote a trilogy which was called Christ and Antichrist trilogy. If you ever come across it, at least read in it. It's worthwhile. In any event, Merezhkovsky, in his book, has in one of the 3 volumes, has I can't distinguish the titles anymore. Besides, you also got to remember that my reading was not entirely, but largely in German, because I was raised from the time that I was a little tyke, I was raised bilingual. We spoke German, like my parents and I spoke German among each other. But when we were out talking to other people, when we went to visit, when we were dealing with our employees in agriculture, and so there we spoke Hungarian. So I grew up like the Habsburg double eagle with 2 heads, you know. I grew up with 2 languages. In any event, so I kept on looking and I kept on searching, so to say. But now, coming back to Merezhkovsky, I think he wrote in Russian, but of course his works were also translated. So I had a set of the 3 volumes Merezkovsky, which was, the volumes were called Christ and Antichrist, or all the three had the same title. And the first of which, I don't think I can think of the title, but then the second one is if you're looking for it, is Leonardo da Vinci, biographical novel of Leonardo. Oh yeah, the first one is Julian and the Death of the Gods. That is the title. Then comes Leonardo da Vinci, and the fourth one comes it either is Peter and Alexei about Tsar Peter the Great and his recalcitrant son or something else, but that is also continuing with the same theme. And the theme is again that some Christ-like influence is trying to come through, and that it had come through once with the Gnostics, but then it had been buried and not utilized. So, all right, I became cognizant of that, and but in it there was one particular scene which I never forgot, and I have an inadequate, pardon the expression, lousy reprint of that old book, English translation, which I still have. And with all my untidy library, I still have it. And that is the first one on Julian the Apostate. Do you know, Julian the Apostate was the nephew of Constantine the Great. Now, that's saying that Joe Blow was the uncle of Mrs. Blow, but he was of the family of the Byzantine emperors, and he revolted against his uncle or whoever set the rules, his rules of establishing Christianity in the Byzantine Empire. He didn't want that. He wanted to revive the ancient pagan religion. And in order to do that, he became the disciple of somebody whom you will read about when you read about the Neoplatonists. And that was Iamblichus. Iamblichus, the great magical Neoplatonist teacher. And Iamblichus persuades him in the book, whether that was that way in history or not, I don't know. Iamblichus persuades him to hold a universal synod to which all people who think themselves Christians and whatever are invited. In other words, a heck of a lot of people, because that by then you had Nestorians and this and that and the others, all kinds of Christian groups that had developed. So here is Julian, who was emperor by then. Julian in his great hall in Byzantium, and there is a gallery, and up in the gallery stands Julian, looking down as to what is, and slowly in come, in groups, various Christian sects, one after the other. And then finally there comes one that I perked up, because just looking at it, it was familiar to me. There was a group of white-clad people, I think both men and women, and in front they carried a cross, and on the cross coiled was the serpent. They held up the snake, and these were the Ophite Gnostics, which is just saying, oh, these are the Gnostics who like the snake likers. So in any event, that image of a sort of a darkened big hall, very full of people, and in comes through the door comes this tall cross with a serpent on it, and behind it a whole bunch of people. This never went out of my mind. I can close my eyes now, so many decades later, and I can see it. Now, can I see it just because I have a real active imagination? Well, perhaps that's no sin. In fact, Carl Jung would have liked me because of that. But whether that is the case or not, an image, an imago of a sort of immense power. And then later on, of course, I found out about the serpentine or ophite, because ophios means the snake in Greek. Serpens means it in Latin. And I don't know what other. Kido is in Hungarian. Schlange is in German. I don't know how many more you want. I don't think you want any. In fact, I'm growing a little bit tired of them already. In any event, an extremely powerful, magical, mystical symbol, which goes back to Moses and the plague in Egypt, where in order to be relieved of the illness, a brazen serpent was brought by Moses to the people. And all they had to do is look at the brazen serpent and their illnesses would be cured. And this, of course, has been taken by many Bible scholars as a symbolic foretaste, as it were, of subsequent times. And that the brazen serpent, which people just had to look at the serpent of brass, and they were healed of this, some kind of plague, an early Egyptian COVID, I take it, when they looked at the serpent. So it became a great magical symbol, and there have been people, both in heterodox Judaism and Christianity, who to this day wear the serpent coiled around the cross. So it is not that it is an immensely powerful symbol and it's going to cause the resurrection of the Gnosis, but it is an image. And it was an image that really grabbed me. I couldn't go to sleep, and closing my eyes, there was it's not a live serpent, by the way. It's a serpent coiled around a Latin cross, usually with the head hanging down on one side. But it is the story from the story of Moses, where Moses and Aaron construct this icon, great big cross with a snake, and then take it around to all the houses of the Jewish people who are sick, and by looking at it, they are healed. Obviously, this is a legend, but the legend has its various reverberations, shall we say. So that was another immense experience to me, because I could, when reading in Merezkovsky that particular page, I was I was taken that these were some of the most important Gnostics, which indeed they were. And to this day, especially with the Gnostic revival, after Elaine Pagels and others, you can find in the jewelry store, and you can have jewelers make out of whatever you want to, of the serpentine cross. So it was again a great big experience, because somehow I said, this is the miracle, this is the magic. It has to do with that serpent on the cross. And of course, symbolically it does. Now, let's see, what else do I have? Is it getting late? Probably is. Always is at this time. But nevertheless, there is a more prolonged sequence that I need to tell, at least in outline form. Around that time when I was reading Merezhkovsky, because I was reading when I was 7. My father made me read every morning. Pardon me, you got to have a little house. There was, against the one wall, that was my bedroom. And from there I could come into a great big long living room, probably about this. And there at the end of the living room table, or one of the living room tables, I found my father every morning. In front of him were numerous boxes of Turkish, Bulgarian, Egyptian, and other cigarettes. And he was smoking. He said, come on, son. So I said, all right. The very first question was not about the cigarettes, but the very first question was, what did you dream tonight? Every night, if I was able to, not if I had a great big cold or so, I had to tell him my dream. And he said, why? Because the power that you are exercising in remembering that is the same power that will make you understand it, and that's one of the most important things in the world. This was one of the few little sermonettes that my father ever gave me, God rest his soul. In any event, there we were, every morning reading, and then I could read books, and then I could be an adult-like little fellow. But it was a lot of fun. But at the same time, this adult-like little fellow, among other things, was constantly searching for Gnosis and for Gnosticism. And so, very soon after the previously recounted incidents, when I was about, probably between 4 and 8 years old, then something else was taking place. And that something else was that I was not exactly troubled, but greatly impressed by events that came to me while I was supposed to be sleeping, yet I was not sleeping. And what this was, that when I went to bed, and then later on I even told my mother, can you imagine? And then my mother came and sat with me every night for years, with a candle or with a kerosene lamp, and I was there. And I was telling her what I was seeing every night. And what I I don't think we should prolong this into another evening. But let's say the first image is just like looking at a great big movie screen, which of course I don't even know whether they had yet at that time. It would have been 1931, 1930 and some. In any event, there I was, I'm supposed to go to sleep, my mother sitting by my side with a kerosene lamp or with a candle, and then I began seeing things. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was seeing things that appeared, like they would with a great big movie screen. It always started the same way. I was standing by a beautiful golden rail, and on the other side of the rail was the beach of the ocean. Now, I had never seen the ocean at that time in my life, again, because we were a naval power before World War I, but again, the immense generosity of the Allies, the Americans, the British, the French, and who else was there? The Italians were among the Allies too. They took our ocean away from us. We had two harbors, Fiume, which became Italy, and what was it? There was another one. But in any event, before that time, we had our own navy, Austro-Hungarian Navy, and commercial shipping and all that sort of thing. But then all of a sudden, if we wanted to see the ocean, we had to go to Italy. Well, you could go to a worse place. They could have sent you to Siberia. But in any event, so what this indicated, that when I had these particular nightly visions, I had never seen an ocean. I had seen some pictures, some photographs and so forth, but I'd never seen an ocean. It took quite a while. I probably was about 14, 15-year-old when my father took me to the Adriatic Sea, to Fiume and Trieste and over there, which was just a wonderful, wonderful countryside. Oh dear, beautiful, beautiful mountains, coast, everything. In any event, then I saw the ocean, but not here before. So here I saw this idyllic scene of looking down on a sky blue water and a blue sky above and various things, and looking down at the ocean. So I stood there wondering, and then all of a sudden the scene changes. It was these visions, if you want to call them, were always working the same way. Next time also. So what would happen is I'd look out and all of a sudden the ocean scene changes and it becomes great dark waves and ugly dark clouds above and lightning and thunder. And then a gigantic, what do we call it nowadays here? A wave like the Japanese always paint about, you know. Yeah. So anyway, one of these great big waves comes, big as 10 mountains. The ocean rises and comes and covers the countryside where I am, and now I am underneath the water. This is how it started every blessed night. Now, if I'm not Meshuggah, as they would call me on Fairfax Avenue, then I don't know what I am. But in any event, then starts the the real interesting part, because now in my vision I am underneath the water, but I'm not drowning, and I knew that you're supposed to, because we had a sizable river next to our house, and all kinds of creatures, including humans, would drown there. But in any event, I wasn't drowning, but I am going to get deeper and deeper under the water, and there all kinds of strange images, strange beings come my way. I have looked at many, many aquariums since then. Whether I ever encounter one that I saw there, no. They either don't exist, or they don't exist in a fashion in we by ordinary mind can see them. But they were all around. Some of them are like hybrid is it octopuses or octopi or octo something? Octopus is the singular one, yeah. In any event, that and all kinds of other things. Fascinating things. And since we were almost in the dark, because usually my mother had a candle with nothing else, so I saw all of this in the dark, but in a luminous fashion. Many kind of octopus-like beings, all kinds of things. The only time later in life where I encountered some images of that sort, at least mental images, was in the writings of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, the great author of the original terrifying story in American literature. A very, very interesting man in the late 19th century. But of course, I didn't know Lovecraft from Hatecraft at that particular time. In any event, every night something new. Strange and often gigantic creatures. Some of them are kind of related to the octopus, some of them to others. Anyway, sea creatures, one after the colorful, luminous, shining, astonishing stuff. And so as my mother told me, and subsequently, here I was, a little fellow, 5 years old, 6 years old, sitting in bed, looking up, looking at the scenery. I said, "Mother, can't you see them? There they are. That is a kind of an octopus. That is another great big fish. And that is something else." So I was describing to her these strange aquatic creatures, which, however, were visible, tangible to us, even though we were not in the water. So this went on that way for years. And my patient mother came every night and sat with me when she was not traveling somewhere, so that together we could experience the strange sea creatures. Now, once again, I am not about to interpret that, but I must say that it was an interesting period. Absolutely. So there were years of a great transformative dream, although it was not a dream, not at all fear-inducing, but remembering, bringing to mind in a roundabout sort of way the earlier dream of the Gnostic demiurgos. That dream foretold my entire life and my lifelong interest in Gnosticism, which as a 4 or 5-year-old boy I identified, as I mentioned before, as the lost Christianity. Now, however, probably the most important thing, or that could be the most important thing of this evening I did not mention, and that is that all of this scenery, particularly the underwater scenery for years and thereafter, was so fantastically beautiful that it would take your breath away. Its chief characteristic was beauty. Beautiful colors, beautiful shapes, and they were sort of, which would be true of the ocean also, so there were like layers of reality there. And the creatures that were moving about, looking at me with some degree of, I don't know, puzzlement or admiration or fear, I probably deserved all of them, that they were there. And they were actual creatures who wanted me to know that they are here and that I should take cognizance of them. I would tell them to my mother, and my mother was sometimes put out. I said, but all right now, why don't I see this? She would say, well, you know, I cannot tell you what to see. I can tell you what I see and what is going on, but you somehow have to do that yourself. It was not a very kind way of treating her, but probably right. So things went on, and still practically all the time, when we were home in our own quarters, my mother would be there with me when these strange things would be happening. Then, when I was about 7 years old, all kinds of changes occurred, both in the world and in our own little world. For one thing, the territory where our house and our estate was located had been taken by Hitler and given back to the Hungarians to whom it belonged to begin with. Because these were Hungarian territories, that's why we spoke Hungarian. And by then, Hitler was not so friendly to the Hungarians, and so he started changing things around. Transylvania became Hungary again. Northern Hungary became Hungary again. But you have all kinds of political changes which changed the countryside. So after I was getting on about 10, we left Northern Hungary, as we always called it, and we lived for a considerable period of time in southern Hungary, in a portion of the land that was actually occupied by quite a few years at that time by Yugoslavia, which was also a newly created country. You don't know how those two world wars butchered Eastern Europe, taking territories from here, putting territories over there, and being nasty to the native population, bringing in other populations, all kinds of weird stuff. But, you know, at that time we still survived. Why? Because there was still the crescent with the crown, either the Hungarian or the Yugoslav, that was on the flags, and not the detestable red flag with its 5-pointed star. Until that time, everything was all right. So be be mindful of symbols. Symbols are of extremely great importance. And once you begin to see the symbols of the demons in this country, that's the time to get out. But I tell you what, it's not going to come to that, because there are enough forces in this country that can prevent that. But, you know, the demonic element with its bloody red flags and its hammer and sickle is still around. And we have to watch out for it, at least I am. Then, of course, a lot of things changed. World War II came, and so forth. And these particular visions that I told you about with the ocean and so forth, I still had them every once in a while, but not very much often anymore. But others, somehow my contact, whatever it was, with the Gnostics was still there. I still saw the cross with the serpent being brought into the hall. I still saw the wicked, cruel demiurge holding on to the entire world with his claws. But with all of that, I knew that what I know will redound to my benefit, that I am under guidance, that I am under inspiration and help, which has never left me, not even until this evening. So it's strange. Of course, the Gnostics themselves said that time is an illusion. Or they didn't use that word, but they said that it is a counterfeit of eternity. Isn't that interesting? That's something to remember. You think that you are in an eternal continuum, but you are really somewhere else. And so eventually, after many years, and now after being on this earth for almost 94 years, I can tell you that there is so much more to life in this cosmos than we imagine. And that we in turn are other cosmos. That we can climb the stairway to heaven, because heaven is in us. And all we need to do is work on it and never forget it, never allow it to go by the wayside, even as we have not forgotten some of the dreadful experiences that may have come to us in this lifetime. I have mentioned often, I don't need to mention it again, that in the winter of 1944-45, for several months, every day when I went outside, I walked on dead people. And that was just a little thing. Don't let me tell you about the big things, because you won't like it. So anyway, I've been through the darkness of the demiurge, but with that also the white ladder which leads beyond this term, beyond this world. The one that if we climb, we get as let's see, which was that? I'm trying to see it here, which William Butler Yeats, who wrote a very beautiful poem with that, which I don't have with me, but I can bring it to you, where he says, and you know, he was a personal disciple of H.P. Blavatsky, and a really remarkable man. And what he describes there is that he's climbing. He's climbing. He says that he's climbing to the objective, which is the eternal whiteness. He climbs through the lesser steps to the eternal whiteness, which is all beauty and which has always been there and which always will be there, and whither we have to go. I'm going to get that complete. It's not a very long poem, and my good friend, who among other things now departed, gave me this lecturing chair. Here, he loved that particular poem by Yeats, and he used it as an introduction to a book that he wrote. So when I find it, I'll bring it here and we'll distribute it. In any event, I came to the conclusion that the ancients were right when they said goodness, truth, and beauty. And that the three are like a three-leaved clover. They are triple blossoms from one root. And if we do it as we ought to, as we find that eternal strange stairway that leads to the goodness, the truth, and the beauty, then we have resisted all demiurges. We were on the way of being home, and we will be home. I know what that home looks like. I have had little entries there, and I still do. And I can promise you that there is beauty, ineffable, beauty indescribable, and that beauty is one of the hallmarks of the ineffable greatness, of the whiteness, as William Butler Yeats calls it, the whiteness from whence we have come. But we have to surrender to it, we have to do what it wants to do, and we have to keep moving along, and then indeed the good, the true, and the beautiful will all manifest to us and through us and beyond us. There is a placeless place. There is an incredible reality, of which this reality within which we live is a poor replica. And the ultimate regions of that place are white as snow, and out of it come all the colors, out of it comes all the beauty, and out of it have we come, and to it we shall go. And so mote it be. Thank you again.